So welcome to class today. Today's going to be a little bit longer than last time. Last time we met for about an hour. Today we'll meet for probably about 2 hours, maybe a little bit longer. I have a meeting later. Sometimes on Fridays, that's what happens. The department meetings on Fridays. And so I planned our class meetings on those days where I know that there's going to be department meetings. So one of them is today, and then one of them later in the semester when we have class meetings. I think one of the things that will be really neat in this class is the part where we're actually out there doing things. And we're gonna get to that. We're basically gonna have a meeting this week and a meeting next week, and then one in the middle of the semester. Other than that, we'll be out in the field or processing data here and talking about it. So, but even today, I'm going to present some material, but I kind of hope that it's, although the class has gotten quite large, I kind of hope it's a little more like a seminar class where people ask me questions. I wish that we could do this like in the conference room. I think we might actually be able to. So maybe I'll move it in there. We can sit down. I can sit down. Because y'all are already sitting down. These chairs are just a little taller than we could do that. But I don't know if any of you have had a chance to go onto Blackboard, but I just put a lot of the stuff that we've been working or that we've seen together onto Blackboard. Okay? So I uploaded the content of the first meeting, and then I uploaded all of the content of the second meeting except for I'm recording the video. I'm recording a video right now. Let me see if that works. Because right now today's PowerPoint is like huge and took a long time to upload. Let's see if it worked. This is it's on there. Okay, great. Is that this right now? Yeah, spring 2017.
The first video that went out on YouTube didn't have any audio.
Oh, no audio? That's disappointing. Let me look here. It looks like the video is recording, and the video. I know I checked the other videos, so I'm not exactly sure why the audio didn't record. But maybe one thing I'll do is, I wish I had a phone book or something. Maybe I'll take a chair. If I sit right next to the computer, it'll get better audio for everybody. Because it is recording audio right now. I can see it in the little thing. All right, I made my own high chair. Hopefully I don't fall off of this thing. I think I got that. Nope, that doesn't work. Never mind. I guess I could just go like this, but it's a little low. And then not anybody can see me, even on the coast. All right, so there's no audio from the first one. Sorry about that. All right. Don't know where. So they're both up there. There's the YouTube link. But I guess there's no audio, so it doesn't really do any good. That is a little taller. Even taller. All right. I should just stand, but I'm lazy. But people, there's standing desks nowadays, and I can't get into the trend. Okay, so today I have uploaded the course, the PowerPoint. It's pretty long. I mean, it's pretty large. So what I want to do is do a few different things. First, I just want to talk about the FAA rules, and I didn't give you any readings on that. So we'll talk about that for a little while. If anybody has any questions, then you can ask me. Obviously, these rules only apply in the United States, but that's where we live. And the laws in other countries do have a lot of similarities, but you still have to figure out what those laws are. And so there are basically two different sets of rules that govern flying the drone for recreational, for fun purposes, and then flying a drone for a what they call a commercial venture. Now, what do you think falls under that? Commercial.
For profit?
For profit. Yeah, it's actually a little more broad than that. But yeah, that definitely falls into that. Business. The way the FAA defines it is that anytime that you're doing it for a benefit other than your personal recreation or pleasure, it falls under this category. So technically, if you were going to fly a drone and your friend operated a real estate business, and you flew a drone and you took a picture of a house, and then he used that that picture on a real estate magazine, even if you weren't paid for it, you should have been licensed to fly that commercially. In other words, you can't count that as hobby or recreational. Now, obviously, I mean, sometimes I wonder, where that line gets drawn. Because what if I just gave it to him for fun, and later on he noticed that it was an area that he could use for profit, and he used it for that, and unfortunately, the FAA has been very I don't know if it's unfortunately or not, but they haven't been super clear on enforcement of that type of operation. In fact, I mean, you've probably seen YouTube videos of people that are doing all sorts of things that we're going to talk about that aren't necessarily okay. So the FAA rules for flying for recreation, I forgot to pull those up. I have the other ones. FAA, fly for fun. Okay, they're pretty concise. I mean, there is a big document, but basically, if you have a UAS, an unmanned aerial system, or a drone, and you want to fly that for fun, you do have to register it if it is more than 0.55 pounds, so really, really small. That's roughly the weight of one stick of butter. Okay, so it's pretty small. Like, unless you're flying like one of those ones that's like this big, you probably technically have to register it, even if you're flying for fun. And actually, I just used a term. I just said you probably have to register it. That's actually not the case. When you're flying for fun, you're technically registering yourself. It's a $5 fee, and you only have to register yourself once for all of your drones or really, we could just say your model aircraft. Any of your model aircraft, you can operate, and you register yourself once, and you get a number, and you put that number on every single model aircraft that you fly. Okay. So you have to do that all the way up to, if it weighs more than 55, it's actually not legal to fly for fun. So it has to weigh up to 55 pounds. That is very, very, very large. But there are people who fly gas planes for fun. Like not often usually for taking aerial photographs, but these are like scale models of World War II airplanes and things like that. I've never done that, but that's what it is. So you have to label your UAS. The rules for how you label your UAS is that the label can go anywhere. It can even be hidden as long as it's accessible without tools. So you can put it under a battery. As long as the battery just snaps out, it's okay. Right? So that's the rule. And then these are the other rules here. Flying at or below 400 feet, keep your UAS within sight, so you have to be able to see it. And a lot of these rules are going to be similar when we talk about the commercial ones. Never fly near other aircraft, especially airports. And if we look at the rules in detail, those rules are 5 miles from an airport. There's actually an app called Before You Fly that'll work for your smartphones. B4U, all like one letter, B4U, fly. And you can look at that, and it'll tell you if you are within 5 miles of an airport. It basically tells you if you're following these rules. Anyway, there are several other rules that they're either less. So the FAA has definitely enforced the never fly over stadiums or sporting events. Specifically, you will get in very big trouble because it's specifically written in there. If you fly over an event, and this is both commercially or recreationally, if you fly over an event with that's expected to have more than 30,000 people in attendance. So if you fly, and that is a blanket statement for like all college football games and obviously all professional sporting events. And then the other ones that kind of make sense. I don't know if anybody has any questions about just direct about these rules. Notice that none of the rules here in the fly for fun say anything about nighttime. Now, flying commercially, they're going to have that rule. And so I've interpreted that if I'm flying for fun, I can fly at night. I don't know if that's something anybody else studying the rules knows that, but I don't see it on the fly for fun rule list, even in the longer document. So occasionally I've taken my drone up and taken pictures, like taking a long exposure. You can see the traffic moving back and forth or whatnot. That's mostly for fun. What we're talking about in this class, making maps, if you had a LiDAR instrument mounted on your drone, you could fly at night, but not legally, not using the Part 107 requirement. But if you were taking pictures, there really wouldn't be any reason for mapping purposes to fly at night. Okay, so getting licensed. That's what we call the Part 107. This is relatively new. It came out in August of last year. So really, we're only 5 months in, or August, is that about 5 months? Anyway, we're only a few months in, less than 6 months into these set of rules. Before these rules came out, there was a much longer process, and it seemed a lot more arbitrary. So as an organization, you would apply to the FAA, and people could comment on your worthiness to be able to do this. And there was a public forum to say, hey, I want to be able to do this, and these are the reasons why. You submitted an application, and the other thing is that you had to be a real licensed pilot. Like when I say real, you had to be licensed
to fly a aircraft. When I say aircraft, I don't mean an airplane. Technically, you could be licensed to fly a balloon, a hot air balloon, or a helicopter, or even a glider. As long as you were licensed to fly an aircraft of any type from the FAA, you could fly an unmanned aerial vehicle. So what they did was that because those rules were kind of convoluted, they changed it to licensing individual people, just like you can be licensed to fly a glider or a aircraft or a small aircraft or a commercial aircraft or a hot air balloon. Now you can be licensed to fly a small unmanned aerial system. An SUAS is what they call it. Okay, so you can get your license to do this, and it's not super difficult. I did it. I studied over a weekend. All right. So here's a little bit of the description on it. I like this document a little bit better just because it's kind of concise. It has the same 55-pound restriction, which is going to be more than enough for anything that almost everybody is doing. Okay. We're not trying to take up advanced weapon systems, and I'm not trying to fly predators here. We're just flying aircraft that need a sensor on them. And the sensor can be carried by an aircraft weighing less than 55 pounds. All right, it does have the same rule in that you need to be able to maintain visual line of sight to your aircraft. And most of these UAS systems nowadays have the ability to actually broadcast a first-person view back to the operator. Okay? I'm sure many of you have actually seen or flown a drone before, but you know what I mean. You can look at a monitor and look through the picture and see what the drone sees. This doesn't count as visual line of sight. You need to be able to see the drone. Okay? Now, it does not say that the unmanned aircraft, you have to maintain eye contact with the drone at all times. That's what it does not say. In fact, if you read the longer explanation, it says that the best practice is to look back and forth between the drone and the first-person view in order to get a frame of reference for where you are. But it does say that you need to be able, and it must remain within visual line of sight. In other words, you could see it if you wanted to. So it's best practices, I believe, to be flying it and then to look occasionally. That does involve a little bit of skill, although they don't test you on that. It does involve a little bit of skill to know where it's going to be in the sky in order to know that. You have to be able to see it without the aid of any binoculars or anything. Okay? You have to be able to see it in the sky. Now, the next rule here, it says that you can't operate over any persons not participating in the operation that are not under a covered structure or vehicle or stationary vehicle. Okay? So, for commercial purposes, you have to notify everybody there and get them to agree and say they're participating or they know that they're there. Okay? Because I guess you could come up with a little bit of wiggle room in there. But as long as they're aware that it's happening, you can make the argument that they are participating in the operation. Okay? But if not, you shouldn't fly over them legally. Okay? Unless they're under a covered structure or inside a stationary vehicle. I actually didn't realize it said stationary vehicle until I just read it. All right. The next one is that you need to be able to fly during daylight. Twilight's okay, but it needs to be during daylight and have lighting. And of course, you have to yield the right-of-way to other aircraft. Last week I was flying in Cayman Islands, and I don't know if they have the same rules, but I'm sure they're very similar. and we heard a big police helicopter take off, and it came over to where we were. We immediately landed because you don't want to be up in the air when there's a helicopter. And there is some debate as to whether or not how much damage a drone can do to an aircraft. But I've seen some pretty compelling tests that show that it could. I mean, the structure of an airframe is not that strong in terms of being able to withstand an impact at very high speed. So like the impact from a drone could crunch in the nose cone on an airplane or cause a significant damage to the side of a helicopter. So anyway, lower it down when you hear a police helicopter, or in our case, we do have helicopters that might be going to the hospital, so be aware of your surroundings there. Okay, I already talked about, the next one there. You can have a visual observer, but it's not required. And the visual observer does not need to be licensed, right? The only person that needs to be licensed is the pilot in command. And interestingly, the pilot in command does not need to be the one that actually is touching the controls to the vehicle. Okay? So that's how we're going to all operate in this course. Is that I do believe there are some student rules too, but I don't know. I haven't been able to determine if they were superseded by this Part 07 because they came out beforehand. But anyway, the pilot in command just has to be able to take over in case of an emergency. So they don't actually have to be flying. So same thing here, maximum ground speed, maximum altitude of 400. The maximum ground speed is 100 miles an hour. It'd be pretty hard with current technology to be collecting camera data moving faster than 100 miles per hour, but it is on there. You have to be able to see 3 miles from the control station. So regardless of whether or not there is whether or not you plan to fly 3 miles away, you still have to be able to see. Visibility has to be 3 miles before you take off. We'll talk a little bit more about airspace here in a second. But there's a few other rules here that are on the test. So like when you go to take the test, you should study some of these other rules that talk about things like transporting property for compensation or hire is allowed, but there's all these different exceptions. I won't read them all right now, but there were actually out of 70 questions, the test has 70 questions. I had 2 questions just in that category. So kind of looking at the rules. So you can't do certain things. Some of the other test questions that were on there that I thought were good were questions on which rules which rules there can be exceptions to. For example, flying in certain airspace, there can be restrictions. There can be exceptions to those. You can apply for exceptions or contact the air traffic control tower directly. Let's see. So this here says if you already have a pilot's license, it's a little easier to get this test. I mean, you take a little easier test. If you don't, you take a harder test. I'm going to stand up for a second. It's hard. Kind of the mechanics of doing this are that you go to a testing center. We only have 2 testing centers in Mississippi. One is in Meridian, and the other one is in Jackson area. Okay. So you can go there. I went to Mobile. So there's one in Mobile. There's also one in the New Orleans area. So you could go, for the coast people, you could go down there. It's $150 to take the test, and if you fail, you don't get your money back. So that's the only real risk to take the test. It's a $150 test. Like I said, there are 70 questions, and you have to get 70% or higher in order to pass. So basically, you got to get a C. I got in the mid 80s. Forgot exactly what my score was, but okay. How did I study for the test? Well, here is a practice test put on by one of the companies that makes one of the drones we're going to be flying, 3DR. It used to stand for 3D robotics. So I put this link on the web page, and it's 3dr.com/FAA. And I started using this exclusively, and now that I look back on it, if I just stuck with this, there's a very good chance that I would have passed just fine, just studying for this. Just studying using this. So this talks about where the testing centers are. You study for the drone exam here, and there are a bunch of, that's probably not the best one to hit. Meet the author. We don't really care about that. But it goes through all the different things that you'll need to know in order to pass the test. And it even has a bunch of practice tests, or not a bunch. It has 2 practice tests, basically the equivalent of 2 practice tests, because it has 126 questions. So it's roughly twice the amount of questions that are on the test. And when you answer them, it'll tell you whether or not you're right or not. Okay. Then what I did, I actually bought a $50 program. So this is a little program that I bought. It's kind of cool. You can. The thing that I liked about the program was that it provided instant feedback. Like when I clicked on it, I got a result. Or in this study mode, you're actually looking at the correct answer in the bottom part right here, the correct answer. And here is the question. And I found that on both the 3DR website and this website, the questions were very close or very similar to the questions that would be on the test, but not exactly the same. One link I forgot to put up that I will put up, they give you the exact, so when you go to the test, you're going to have a little booklet. And that booklet has a bunch of aeronautical charts in it. It has a few cryptic weather, I call them METARs, cryptic weather codes in it. And you can actually download the exact copy of that supplement from the internet, and I'll get that. So that when you go there, you're looking at charts you've already seen. Although you may not know what they're going to ask you about that chart, you can look at the entire chart and look at the things on that chart and become familiar with it so that you can answer the question quickly. It's not that difficult, but it is like studying for a test where you may not be super familiar with all the material. The questions that I was surprised I did not do that well on were the weather questions. And then the questions that I expected not to do well on were kind of like these general pilot questions. But a lot of them were a lot more common sense than I thought. I don't know if we got another question. Now this is more like a rules question. Okay, if you used your 10-pound quadcopter to take a promotional video inside of their domed indoor sports arena on a day when the area is closed and there are no other people inside, your quadcopter would never be flying outside the building. Does Part 107 apply? Yes, it still applies. Here's the explanation. Yeah, these type of questions. CRM is defined as what? And then the answer is the application of key management concepts in the flight deck environment. I really that's more like a question the pilot would get, right? So, but I did pretty well on these types of questions just because they ended up being more common sense than I figured. Not saying I would have known that one, but the nice thing about this type of a guide is that it did give you a location of where you should have known it. So you kind of got to pull in additional resources because of that. Okay. I'm going to close this up. And, you know, if I know that some of you are far away, but this is loaded on my laptop. It's key locked to my laptop, but if anybody ever wanted to spend, you know, an hour and we could schedule it, I'd be willing to let them use that resource that I've purchased. But again, this is just a little more clunky, but contained the exact same type of information. I believe I could have passed with just that. Okay, so once you pass the test, you have to go register on a website that they'll give you instructions once you pass the test. And as soon as you register, well, not as soon as you register, like an hour or two later, you can go onto that website and print a temporary certificate. And you're supposed to have either your permanent certificate or your temporary certificate whenever you're flying, okay? Whenever you fly. And one of the other things that is on the test is that you do have to report a crash, but only if that crash causes $500 or more worth of damage, and that doesn't include the drone, okay? So if the drone's $500, you crash it, you have to report that. But if you crash into a car and you have to report that to the FAA. And or a person had to go to seek medical attention, then you have to report it. I guess even if it costs less than $500. All right. So those rules are also on the test, by the way, and those are some of the rules. Anybody have any other questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So when you become licensed to operate, I guess commercially, does the FAA automatically recognize you operating under a license commercially, or say more relaxed?
Right. So I did point out, like, from my interpretation of the rules, that flying at night was actually less restrictive in the fun rules than it was in the commercial rules. And so, no, you can still fly for fun and be commercially registered. So, at least that's the way I interpreted the rules, and I've done that, and I'm almost positive that's the case in the rule books. Now, in most cases, I meant to go over these. In most cases, the commercial rules are actually a little less restrictive. For one, you can be 400 feet above any structure in the commercial rules. So you can fly, like I could fly 400 feet above Johnson Science Tower here if I met all the other rules, like not flying over people and such. So that's one of the ways that it's less restrictive. The other way is that being close to an airport is no longer defined as being 5 miles from an airport. Now, it is purely about airspace. Okay, here's an example of a chart, of an aeronautical chart. So if you can't fly inside of any airspace except for Class G airspace without permission from the air traffic control tower. But most of the time, most of the time the Class D airspace, like for a small airport, doesn't extend all the way out to 5 miles. It only extends out 2 or 3 miles. So you can fly much closer to an airport without asking permission using a commercial license rather than flying, Recreationally, exactly. Now, one of the things to point out that I actually got a lot of things, this is something I just remembered. I got a lot of questions wrong about this because I never thought of myself as ever being in, not a lot of questions, we got a few questions wrong in this regard, because I never thought of myself as being in this position or even realizing that this position exists. But there are towers, like microwave towers and very tall towers that go up 1,000 feet or sometimes, okay, above the ground level. And you need to think about airspace as three-dimensional space. And so some of the test questions got a little bit tricky because you'd be going up into restricted airspace when it wasn't restricted on the ground. And so you could see in that Class C bubble, Class C is wider up at 1,200 feet than it is on the ground usually. Okay? So these airspaces are kind of like canisters, not flat things on a map. You know, we sometimes as geographers we think of a flat thing on the map. In reality, they're big. Now, there were even questions on the test to what are the limits of Class airspace, and that one I really was puzzled as to why it was on the test for UAS vehicles, because I'm never going to get to 18,000 mean sea level in my little drone, right? So, all right, good question. Any other questions?
I got one more.
Sure.
Where do you draw the line between recreation and personal research / university research?
Yeah, so that's a good one for me because you know, I could say I was doing this for fun, but really as a researcher, almost everything I do I could call fun, right? I mean, it's not super fun. Grading papers, that's about the worst. But everything else is pretty fun. And so, yeah, I mean, I usually call everything commercial, except for when I want to fly and take a long exposure picture at night, because that's really the only time that commercial says no. And really, the way I justify that, or the way I draw that line, is that there's really no research purpose to that activity, and there really isn't. I mean, if I take a picture at night, I suppose if I was a cultural geographer, there might be a research activity associated with that, and then they would have a different moral dilemma. But when I take a picture of something, since I'm not writing papers about cultural geography, it's for fun, and in the daytime it doesn't really matter. I mean, that's really the only rule that I have to overcome is that nighttime, that example of that nighttime shot. Because all the other times I can say I'm flying commercially, although flying under the commercial rules is usually the better option anyway. So I don't think there's really an advantage to saying, hey, I'm flying recreationally, unless you're doing that one rule that seems less restrictive. By the way, if I go here to, if you go to FAA register or drone, it used to be that you actually had to give your drone an N number back in the 333 days. That was the rules before the 107 rules. But now you just log in here and you can look at your account type. I do have a model aircraft account type, and I can click into there, and I did actually use my work address, but here's my number that I can affix to all my model aircraft drones, all the ones I want to fly for recreational, for fun purposes. And then here's all the non-model aircraft that we currently fly. Let's see, 1, 2, yeah. There's actually a few more than that now, but I haven't flown them yet for the university. Okay, and it's $5 to register yourself, and it's also $5 for each vehicle that you need to register if you're doing it commercially. So, and then the registration lasts for 2 years for your vehicles and for yourself, and also your license, your commercial license lasts for 2 years. Now there is a different test to renew your license, and I'm not sure how much that one is. It might still be $150, but that's that. Okay. So I think we went over most of the rules and FAA and how you would go about licensing yourself. But it's basically you study and you pass the test. A little success story. I have a former student that graduated about 7 years ago, and he was a good student. He studied turtles and dug up stuff. I had no idea. I mean, he wasn't interested in drones at the time. He went off and got a job with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then I posted the picture of. I think some of you might have seen it out of Red Bluff. Posted that on Facebook, and he's not even my friend on Facebook, so I'm not sure how he saw it, but he saw it and made a comment and said that he just got hired to work for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And he went from not doing anything with UAS to buying one for fun, to getting licensed commercially, to getting hired by the federal government. He already had a federal government job, so that's probably a little bit easier in that case. But he went through that process in less than a year. In fact, only about 9 months. He went all the way through that process, and now he's flying those vehicles. And like I said, the first week in class, hopefully we'll get I haven't heard back from him, but hopefully we'll get to go on a field trip up to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and look at some of the toys they have. The drones that they use. All right, any other questions on the FAA stuff? All right. So, for the rest of the course, and for the rest of the class, I want to go through some of the projects that I've worked on and use that to talk about this process of creating maps with drones, with unmanned aerial systems. And hopefully those will spark some discussion. And then next week we're going to get a little bit more into some of the remote sensing mechanics. So that might be a little bit, hopefully everybody can still come and contribute, because I know some of you are already very wise in that, or knowledgeable in that realm, and some of you aren't. But I do want to cover that. So today, though, it's going to be an overview. So we already did this. Actually, before we do that, I did want to show this slide. Maybe I should wait until we're actually about ready to fly these drones. But actually, one thing I'm going to do right now.